The dollar has been the world's reserve currency for over 50 years, but now its dominance is being challenged by the BRICS countries. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa have been discussing the creation of a new currency for several years, and there is growing speculation that this currency could eventually surpass the dollar. The potential currency, while still under review and development, would allow these nations to assert their economic independence while competing with the existing international financial system. The current system is dominated by the US dollar, which accounts for about 90% of all currency trading and nearly 100% of oil trading. Central to this ongoing situation is the US trade war with China, as well as US sanctions on China and Russia. If the BRICS nations establish a new reserve currency, it would likely significantly impact the US dollar, potentially leading to a decline in demand. In turn, this would have implications for the US and global economies. While each of the BRICS nations has its reasons for supporting this initiative, vital questions arise regarding the adoption of the new currency and its feasibility. So, why do BRICS want to make a new currency? Is making a new BRICS currency realistic? Would the BRICS currency be able to surpass the dollar and fill the void? These are the questions we will be exploring in this video. Before we start, if you enjoyed this video, please give a like, it helps a lot. I'll be releasing more videos on interesting topics in the future, and I'd love to have you along for the ride. Thanks for watching. So, what do you think? Will the dollar survive against a BRICS currency? Leave a comment below. Now let's start with the beginning. Why do BRICS want to make a new currency? What would be the benefits? Well, there are several reasons why the BRICS countries might want to create a new currency. First, they believe that a BRICS currency would give them more control over their own economies. Second, they believe that a BRICS currency would be less vulnerable to US sanctions. Third, they believe that a BRICS currency would help to promote trade and investment between the BRICS countries. Let's call the hypothetical currency the BRIC. If the BRICS used only the BRIC for international trade, they would remove an impediment that now thwarts their efforts to escape dollar hegemony. Those efforts now often take the form of bilateral agreements to denominate trade in non-dollar currencies, like the Chinese yuan, now the main currency of trade between China and Russia. The impediment: Russia is unwilling to source the rest of its imports from China. So after bilateral transactions between the two countries, Russia tends to want to park the proceeds in dollar-denominated assets to buy the rest of its imports from the rest of the world, which still uses the dollar for trade. If China and Russia each used only the BRIC for trade, however, Russia would not have any need to park the proceeds of bilateral trade in dollars. After all, Russia would be using BRIC, not dollars, to buy the rest of its imports. Enter, at last, de-dollarization. Is it realistic to imagine the BRICS using only the BRIC for trade? Yes, they could fund the entirety of their import bills by themselves. In 2022, as a whole, the BRICS ran a trade surplus, also known as a balance of payments surplus, of $387 billion, mostly thanks to China. The BRICS would also be poised to achieve a level of self-sufficiency in international trade that has eluded the world's other currency unions. Because a BRICS currency union, unlike any before it, would not be among countries united by shared territorial borders. Its members would likely be able to produce a wider range of goods than any existing monetary union, like the Eurozone, also home to a $476 billion trade deficit in 2022. But the BRICS would not even need to trade only with each other, because each member of the BRICS is an economic heavyweight in its own region. Countries around the world would likely be willing to do business in the BRIC. If Thailand felt compelled to use the BRIC to do business with China, Brazil's importers could still purchase shrimp from Thai exporters, keeping Thailand's shrimp on Brazil's menus. Goods produced in one country can also circumvent trade restrictions between two countries by being exported to and then re-exported from a third country. That's often a consequence of new trade restrictions, like tariffs. If the United States boycotted bilateral trade with China, rather than trade in the BRIC, its children could continue to play with Chinese-made toys. That became exports to countries like Vietnam, and then exports to the United States. Another factor that accentuated the will to make a new currency comes from Russia, which is seen as a worst-case scenario. You see, American and European governments have prioritized Russia's economic isolation. Nevertheless, some US and European goods continue to flow into Russia. The costs for consumers are real, but not catastrophic. As officials in BRICS countries grow increasingly emphatic about their desire to de-dollarize, with today's Russia as an upper bound of how bad it could get, the risk-reward trade-off of de-dollarization will look increasingly attractive. Is making a new BRICS currency realistic? The BRICS countries are unlikely to seriously challenge the king dollar if their only tool is just another fiat currency they can create out of thin air. The US has the largest and safest government bond market, no capital controls, and a reputation for enforcing the rule of law. By contrast, the BRICS countries are not as well known for respecting laws or having strong currencies. All BRICS countries have a history of corruption and political instability. This makes their government bond markets less attractive to investors, as there is a greater risk of default. But perhaps more importantly, non-US entities have $12 trillion of US dollar-denominated debt that they need to pay back with dollars, so abandoning the dollar would be incredibly difficult and costly. Of course, their competition with the dollar would ultimately end in failure, as Bretton Woods did, if the BRICS countries continue to create money out of thin air to finance their warfare and welfare spending. The BRICS will have a much better chance if they create a hard currency backed by gold or other commodities like oil. Is it realistic to imagine the BRIC finding these? Yes, the BRICS countries have a combined gold reserve of around 5.443 tons, which makes them the second largest owner of gold reserves after the US, which has 8,133 tons. China has quadrupled its gold reserves over the past 20 years, as you can see in this graph. And, because the BRICS run a trade and balance of payments surplus, the BRIC would not necessarily need to attract any foreign money at all. BRICS governments could use some combination of carrots and sticks to get their own households and firms to buy BRIC assets with their savings and effectively coerce and subsidize the market into existence. The BRIC, to be fair, would raise a litany of thorny practical concerns. Used primarily for international trade rather than domestic circulation within any one country, the BRIC would complicate the job of national central bankers in BRICS countries. Creating a supranational central bank like the European Central Bank to manage the BRIC would also take work. These are challenges, but not necessarily insurmountable ones. The geopolitics among BRICS members is also thorny, but a BRICS currency would represent cooperation in a well-defined area where interests align. Countries like India and China may have an ongoing territorial problem, but both countries do share an interest in de-dollarizing, and they can cooperate on shared interests while competing with others. Would the BRICS currency be able to surpass the dollar and fill the void? One of the biggest challenges is the economic diversity of the BRICS countries. The economies of these countries range from large and developed economies, like China and India, to smaller and less developed economies, like South Africa and Brazil. This diversity would make it difficult to agree on a common currency that would be suitable for all of the BRICS countries. Another challenge is the political instability of some of the BRICS countries. Russia and Brazil have both experienced political instability in recent years, which could make investors hesitant to use their currencies. If investors are not confident in the stability of a country's economy, they are less likely to use its currency. Also, BRICS countries do not have the same level of financial infrastructure as the United States. The United States has a well-developed financial system that makes it easy to trade and invest in the dollar. The BRICS countries would need to develop their financial infrastructure to make it easier to trade and invest in their currencies. If the BRICS are successful, and the US does not change its policies to focus on a stronger dollar, less spending, and peace instead of war, the dollar may slowly lose its reserve currency status. This would hurt US living standards and lead to less power for the US government, similar to the weakening of the UK after World War II. All empires in history have failed, and the US will not likely be an exception. If the BRICS can create a successful hard currency to compete with the dollar, the new BRICS currency is very unlikely to completely replace the dominance of the US dollar. Instead, it would reduce the area where the dollar holds power. Even if the BRICS de-dollarized, much of the world would still use dollars, and the global monetary order would become more multipolar than unipolar. It is still unclear what the real consequences would be if a new currency for BRICS countries is created, or when it will be created. However, we may find new detail at the next BRICS summit in August 2023. While a BRICS currency is unlikely to surpass the dollar shortly, it is possible that it could become more widely used in the long term. If the BRICS countries can overcome their economic and political differences, and they can increase their economic integration, then a BRICS currency could become a more viable alternative to the dollar. If you like this video, don't forget to give a like for the algorithm, and subscribe for more videos. Thanks for watching.